The use of drugs to enhance combatants' performance during war is a widely documented tradition in history. It dates back even to ancient times, for instance, with Viking warriors consuming hallucinogenic mushrooms to become immune to pain. In more modern contexts, there are irrefutable pieces of evidence of drugs administered to soldiers by their superiors. These ranged from cocaine in the trenches of World War I to anabolic steroids in current conflicts, even passing through LSD experiments by the CIA. In this regard, the Nazis were not left behind. During their conquests in Europe, they conducted numerous trials with the aim of achieving the perfect soldier, capable of carrying out orders without rest and without being affected by hunger or morality. If they succeeded, their victory would be almost guaranteed. Today, in this new episode of Military History, we will tell you all about the experiments to create the Nazi super soldier during World War II. Long before Hitler came to power, Germany was already a pioneer in the chemical industry. For example, morphine, an opioid used as an analgesic but with great addictive power, was discovered by the German Friedrich Wilhelm Adam Serturner in the early 19th century. The first pharmaceutical companies were of German origin, and the most well-known companies today, such as Bayer and Pfizer, also share this origin. By the 1920s, the country was one of the leaders in the manufacturing of morphine and cocaine, which were legal at that time. The population, severely affected by the economic crisis following its defeat in World War I, sought to alleviate their sorrows through these drugs, as we can see in the following video.
Bueno, en primer lugar tenemos que entender que la cocaína fue un producto alemán. La compañía alemana Merck la patentó en los años 20. Y por ejemplo, Perú exportaba toda su producción de coca al puerto de Hamburgo de manera legal en esa época. En Alemania, la cocaína era un producto legal muy conocido.
But there was a man who viewed these habits with disdain. For him, drug addiction was a sign of weak and subhuman character. We're talking about Adolf Hitler, whose Nazi party campaigned with the idea of eliminating this aberrant attitude from the Aryan person. He and his followers associated dependence on these substances with Judaism, claiming that the latter were responsible for so many upstanding citizens falling into drug addiction. In his first year in power, Hitler made a number of decisions to eliminate those he saw as lost cases from society, from prison sentences of 2 years or more for addicts, to banning their marriage, even their sterilization. But much more terrible measures were also employed. Grouping them with other people accused of having mental illnesses, they were systematically eliminated through euthanasia under the Action T4 program. This operation began shortly after the start of World War II and aimed to eliminate those perceived by the government as genetically inferior, as the following video says.
El programa T4 estaba comprometido con la purificación de la raza mediante la esterilización obligatoria y la eutanasia. Cualquiera que se considerara genéticamente defectuoso, los enfermos mentales, los discapacitados, los homosexuales, eran blancos potenciales del programa T4.
Victims of this program would include both people from territories conquered by Germany and citizens of the Third Reich itself. But even so, with all these measures criminalizing these acts, the German population continued to consume drugs, and not illegally. How did this happen? Many drugs started out being legally used until after a while, adverse effects were noticed in the population. The case of cocaine was already mentioned, and the same happened in these years with other products, for example, methamphetamine. In 1938, it was sold under the name Pervitin, or Pervitina, without any regulation. People saw it as something akin to coffee, only much more potent. When they took it, they felt an energizing effect that made them able to resist sleep for hours. It suppressed hunger and gave them a boost of confidence. It was even marketed in chocolate tablets or candies to lift the mood. It would be naive to say that its harmful side effects were unknown during these years of unrestricted sale, but they were concealed from the public. Let's hear the words of a historian on this event.
En 1938, el laboratorio Temmler comenzó a sintetizar la primera anfetamina con fines médicos. Se comercializó con el nombre de pervitina. El eslogan rezaba "Für die Gesundheit", para la salud.
It didn't take long until the Nazi government ordered experiments with this drug, aiming to enhance the performance of their armed forces in combat. Hitler and his generals had devised strategies to crush their enemies based on speed, through blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This required rapid and coordinated movements from all elements of the armed forces, primarily infantry and armored vehicles. The Nazi leaders wanted to avoid at all costs a war of attrition like the one that occurred during the First World War, which ended in their defeat. To carry out these innovative tactics, they needed their troops to be in a constant state of alert, disregarding combat fatigue and persisting with their objectives. According to the plans, large amounts of territory had to be covered in a short time to overwhelm enemy soldiers, so breaks for sleeping or eating had to be few or simply non-existent. One of the main proponents of the idea of drugging troops to achieve good results was Otto Ranke. This man was the director of the Institute of General and Defense Physiology of the Third Reich, and he always sought to fight against combat fatigue. For him, the last 15 minutes of a battle could decide who would win, so he required troops to be resilient and not succumb to fatigue. The first thing he did was an experiment with 3 groups of soldiers. They were ordered to perform mathematical exercises for a large number of hours. To help them, one group was given coffee, another a placebo, and the last group, Pervitin. The results spoke for themselves. Those who had consumed methamphetamine had solved the problems more quickly and without distractions. It didn't matter that their answers were incorrect. The German High Command, satisfied with the evidence, approved its use in the armed forces. Ranke was pleased. The real-world test would not be long in coming. World War II began with the Nazi invasion of Poland in September 1939. The Polish army resisted for just under a month before being defeated. In May 1940, Germany conquered Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and France. It took them only 6 weeks. According to some researchers, in both instances, the attackers used large quantities of Pervitin to achieve these incredible feats. It's said that 35 million tablets of the drug were distributed to German soldiers, mainly to tank crews and infantry. These soldiers were tasked with covering tens to hundreds of kilometers in just days, fighting for every meter of gained ground. Due to these astonishing actions, there is no doubt they were key in the conquest of the mentioned countries. We can now listen to a military officer explaining to his men how the blitzkrieg worked.
And the defense was doomed to failure because it was confronted with an entirely new technique in warfare, the plane tank infantry team in action. The world was staggered by the speed with which the German armored columns moved. What was the secret that enabled armies to move so far so rapidly? The secret lay in the organization of the striking spearhead. Armored forces came first, closely followed by motorized divisions, which peeled off, forming solid walls. And through the corridor thus formed, raced the supply trucks to feed the ever-lengthening column.
The reports of the tests with Pervitin spoke of desired effects, such as increased attention span, improved performance, excellent mood, maximum discipline, and great dynamism. This partly explains how they were able to surpass enemy defenses in the way they did. No one expected such a swift mobilization of such a massive force to be possible. Reports from the invaded countries speak of German troops appearing at frontline positions hours or even days earlier than anticipated. The fighters called them Stuka pills. This was a dive bomber used by the German Air Force. Soldiers said that the adrenaline rush felt when the plane began its descent before an attack was similar to the effect produced when taking this drug. After these results, the Nazi leaders were convinced they had found a pharmaceutical miracle, almost capable of winning the war on its own. But this illusion was soon shattered. Nowadays, the adverse effects of methamphetamine are well documented. There's a reason why its sale and distribution are illegal, but in the early 1940s, the severity of these conditions was not fully understood. It was soon observed that although the performance of soldiers who had taken Pervitin was exceptionally high, it only lasted for a few hours. The next day, the men were in a terrible state, unfit for combat. Anxiety, insomnia, bursts of violence, and even hallucinations were just some of the effects recorded in the drugged men. To make matters worse, they needed several days to recover from their deplorable state. Additionally, the drug had a tremendously powerful addictive effect, so the troops suffered withdrawal syndromes after just mild exposure to Pervitin. This made them very susceptible to fits of rage, where they would vent their anger on innocent civilians or even their superiors. There were also reports of heart attacks that ended the lives of the affected soldiers. Not only the rank-and-file soldiers suffered the consequences of these products. Hermann Göring, head of the German Air Force and creator of the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, was a known morphine addict. He had developed it during World War I and would be subject to this vice until the end of his days. It was also rumored that Otto Ranke consumed Pervitin daily, the product he had pushed so much. But even the supreme leader, Adolf Hitler, had his drug secret. While there is no evidence that he took methamphetamines, there is no doubt that he frequently injected himself with a cocktail of drugs, including opioids, steroids, and more, supplied by his personal doctor. In particular, there are records of his dependence on Eucadal, a painkiller much more powerful than morphine. Despite the relaxation of Nazi policies regarding drug consumption, they had to face the reality that an army of addicts or people in withdrawal would not be able to win the war. By 1941, the chief physician of the Third Reich, Leonardo Conti, who was involved in the aforementioned Action T4 plan, began reporting on the harmful effects of Pervitin. Thus, the drug became part of the list of prohibited medications. It was only allowed by prescription and in moderation. Due to all the adverse effects that made the troops unpredictable, taking it during combat was discouraged. Nevertheless, there are records of soldiers with symptoms of methamphetamine withdrawal until 1942, during the invasion of the Soviet Union. Many needed the product to endure the intense cold of the Russian winter, and numerous pilots couldn't carry out their large number of air missions without their usual consumption. Once they fell into the habit, it was difficult for these men to get out of it, and smuggling of the pills became a frequent market. But despite Pervitin being banned, this wasn't the last attempt by Nazi Germany to develop super soldiers. By 1944, the fate of the war was already sealed. The Third Reich was in full retreat towards Berlin, fighting on two fronts. In the West, the Allies were quickly reclaiming Western Europe, while in the East, the Soviet Red Army was sweeping aside its enemies, leaving thousands dead in its wake. Seeking the miracle that would allow them to win the conflict, Nazi scientists turned again to drugs. One of Hitler's illusory theories was to defeat his enemies with mini-submarines. These consisted of vehicles with 1 or 2 crew members that would be able to infiltrate among enemy vessels to torpedo them without being discovered. To achieve the maximum possible effectiveness in these operations, a way was needed to keep these men alert and focused on their work for the entire duration of these missions. Living conditions in submarines were appalling, with confinement in a cramped space, constant engine noise, lack of oxygen, and the need to stay awake for long periods. Something even more potent than Pervitin was needed. You can see what these vehicles were like in the following video.
Este submarino para un solo tripulante se utilizó a finales de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Dentro de esta cápsula iba un soldado, cuya misión era hundir los barcos del enemigo. Debajo hay un torpedo armado. La particularidad de este sistema es que la cápsula solo podía abrirse y cerrarse desde el exterior. Y como para los soldados, era muy duro desplazarse en esta embarcación. En este espacio tan exiguo, efectivamente los drogaban.
The Nazis got to work. By late November 1944, they began experimenting with different chemical mixtures to find the miraculous drug. These trials took place in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp within Germany. There, political and military prisoners were housed, including Joseph Stalin's eldest son, the leader of the Soviet Union. One of the main objectives of this place was to design the most effective method for carrying out mass murders. It was one of the first detention centers where executions were tested using gas chambers. But this time, the Germans were seeking a different kind of outcome. To find the desired drug that would allow them to win the war, Nazi scientists cruelly experimented on prisoners from this camp. The tests involved giving each person a different mixture of drugs and forcing them to walk continuously around the yard. They were not allowed to stop until they collapsed from exhaustion. This was a real torture for the detainees, who, severely weakened by the inhumane conditions of their confinement, could not withstand these studies. Some became so exhausted that they were sent directly to the gas chamber at the end of the experiments. A historian recounts how these investigations were conducted in the following video.
And what they did is
Los médicos formaron dos grupos de sujetos. Los observaban, los pesaban, les tomaban toda clase de medidas. Luego les administraban diferentes drogas en diversas dosis y les hacían caminar lo más rápido posible, cargando con unas mochilas muy pesadas. Y veían cuánto tiempo aguantaban el ritmo.
10 different mixtures were tested. The one that yielded the best results was called D9, which consisted of cocaine, morphine, and Pervitin. They had managed to get the prisoners, even in their weakened state, to march 90 kilometers per day while carrying a load of 20 kilograms. However, this drug was never distributed among the Nazis, and its effects during combat could not be witnessed. These trials ended up being just another brutality perpetrated by the Germans without achieving anything in return. The investigations into drug use by the Nazis sparked intense debate. For some, they seek to justify or excuse the terrible actions of these individuals due to the use of drugs. This includes both the soldiers who committed war crimes and the leaders who ordered them, as well as the citizens who did not rebel. However, the authors of these reports, which brought to light the use of these products, declare that Pervitin or any other chemical was not the determining factor in the behavior of the German forces during and before World War II. The Nazi leaders and their subordinates had total freedom to make their decisions. Despite all the tests carried out by the Germans, they never managed to obtain the desired super soldier capable of delivering victory. What they did achieve was to carry out cruel experiments using human beings, whether prisoners or their own soldiers, as guinea pigs. Additionally, they created hundreds or thousands of addicted veterans who, even years after the conflict ended, continued to seek the effects of Pervitin consumption. An ideology that viewed recurrent drug users as inferior ironically led many of their own supporters to fall into these habits. In the dark recesses of history lie surprising and disturbing tales. One of the most intriguing is the use of drugs by Adolf Hitler during the Second World War. Behind these events stands the Führer's personal physician, Theodor Morell, whose name is closely linked to supplying psychoactive substances to Hitler and the Nazi militias. But the story goes beyond mere stimulants. We're talking about entering a world of excess, addictions, and desperate decisions amidst the chaos of war. We will explore the impact of drugs in the Führer's universe to uncover how pharmaceuticals influenced the actions of the German government in the Second World War. Get ready for a fascinating and unsettling journey through the deepest secrets of the Third Reich. Theodor Morell became a key figure in Adolf Hitler's life during the last years of the Nazi regime. Their controversial relationship, marked by the Führer's dependence on the treatments of this contentious doctor, has sparked endless questions and debates among historians. The physician entered Hitler's inner circle in 1936, quickly earning the dictator's trust thanks to his apparent success in alleviating his physical ailments, particularly his digestive issues. He employed a wide range of substances, from vitamins and hormones to animal extracts and experimental medications, generating controversies among the leader's closest associates. Morell's influence over Hitler grew over time, to the extent that he was considered a wizard by the Führer. This bond was reinforced by the flattery and servility Morell showed towards Hitler, whom he considered an infallible genius. Let's listen to a historian talking about this dark character and what a typical medical routine to which Adolf Hitler himself was subjected.
He gave him injections of glucose because he felt that Hitler needed strengthening, he needed building up a bit. Hitler was a vegetarian who had a fairly miserable diet. We have the menus that were made up for him for Christmas Day, for example, which are just terrible.
The specific details of the treatments and drugs administered by the doctor have been the subject of debate and speculation for decades, fueling conspiracy theories and questioning the health status and behavior of the Führer. The relationship between Morell and Hitler raises intriguing questions about the physician's influence on the decisions of the totalitarian leader and his overall health. Was he a dedicated healer seeking to alleviate his patient's suffering, or an opportunist who leveraged his position to gain favor with the most powerful man of the time? In the last months of 1944, Morell's power reached new proportions. After the failed assassination attempt he had suffered, Hitler clung more than ever to his doctor, whose influence was magnified with every dose of medication he administered. The dictator always wanted to have the healthcare professional available at the Wolf's Lair, as the Nazi headquarters was called, as he trusted him like no other. He found in the doctor a confidant and companion in the darkest moments, as he seemed to understand like no one else the physical afflictions that plagued him. While the shadow of the danger of a new assassination attempt lurked in every corner, an SS guard watched over each entrant as if they were a potential assassin. However, the doctor's briefcase and his person were an exception. They passed freely without being examined, a gesture of the unbreakable trust Hitler had in him. The enviable position of the self-proclaimed sole doctor generated jealousy and suspicion within Hitler's circle. Morell's reluctance to share his healing methods fueled rumors and intrigue, enveloping him in an aura of mystery and power. Even figures like Martin Bormann, Hitler's personal secretary, stumbled upon his refusal to modify and share details of the leader's treatment. But with the decline of the war and the potential Nazi defeat, scapegoat seekers began to emerge. The doctor's opponents organized themselves, with Himmler at the forefront, accumulating evidence not only of the strange medications he administered to the Chancellor, but also accusing him of morphine addiction and other scientific crimes. Amidst chaos and uncertainty, the doctor struggled to maintain his position and reputation against the looming rumors. Outlandish theories about his true identity emerged, fueling conspiracies and fear in all sectors of the Reich. The imminent defeat often triggers paranoid behaviors. Despite his impeccable suits and silk shirts trying to disguise it, Theodor Morell couldn't escape the stigma of his nicknames: the greasy one, the stinky one, the malodorous one. He was an obese and unpleasant man who was far from the figure of the Aryan Superman that the Reich sought to impose. Let's listen to a professional talking about how this controversial doctor was perceived by Hitler's entourage.
Dr. Morell was a rather unpleasant person, at least most people in Hitler's entourage found him unpleasant. He was overweight, he was a bit of a slob, he was a noisy, messy eater, he was something of a glutton who shoved food down himself. He had a rather strong and unpleasant body odor. But Hitler, when he was faced with criticisms of Dr. Morell of this kind, said, "I don't employ Dr. Morell for his fragrance, I employ him to look after my health."
Despite the whispers and disdainful looks, the Führer chose him as his personal physician, and no criticism or revulsion could move him from that privileged position. For that reason, every ailment of Hitler was attended to by Morell with unparalleled dedication. Every morning, like a modern-day alchemist, he prepared a mysterious potion that promised to cure all the ailments of the Nazi leader. Vitamins, minerals, enzymes, testosterone, and even bull semen for his nights with Eva Braun, all mixed into a supposedly miraculous injection. But among the secret ingredients, the true elixir of happiness for Hitler was hidden: cocaine. Before delving into the Führer's use of drugs, we will tell you the conclusion of this complex character. Morell stayed with his patient until the end. He accompanied him in the bunker where the last breaths of the Second World War were witnessed. With the roar of the Red Army's weapons resonating around him, the doctor, who by that time was already dubbed the Needle Chancellor or the Injector Minister, dared to ask Hitler for permission to flee. Miraculously, he succeeded. On April 22, 1945, he boarded one of the last planes leaving Berlin, escaping the tragic consequences. However, his fate was not to be so fortunate. Captured by an American patrol, he spent several months in a prisoner of war camp before being released. Surprisingly, he was never accused of any crime, and his life followed a path marked by decline. He died at the age of 61, obese and addicted to morphine, a victim of a stroke. In the midst of the chaos and desperation of war, Hitler sought refuge in the warm embrace provided by drugs. Any substance that promised an escape from harsh reality was welcome in his world. Soon, cocaine became his constant companion, providing temporary relief from his sorrows. Obviously, it was always provided by his sycophantic doctor to administer the doses. However, the Führer was not a slave to a single drug and sought new sensations and emotions, switching from stimulant to stimulant, always pursuing something more. A historian specializing in this particular topic describes how the Führer's diagnosis was and reveals an impressive detail of his psychological evaluation.
He was either severely depressed or overly optimistic, completely unrealistic about the reality of the war. And I think that constant back and forth of his mania and depression throughout the last few years of the war was an effect of the interaction of the amphetamines and the bipolar disorder.
He kept a personal diary in which he narrated his narcotic episodes. The words resonated with a sense of grandeur and egotism, clearly the result of the stimulating effects of drugs. Let's listen to a passage from the Chancellor himself. The weeks that followed July 20th were a true hell. It was a heroic feat that no one, not even a German, could conceive. Despite immense pain, endless dizziness, and profound anguish, I remained steadfast and fought with indomitable energy. The danger of defeat was always present, but I clung to my will with unwavering determination. Without directly alluding to cocaine, it was clear that he believed it gave him superhuman abilities. It was during the dark October of 1944 when Hitler decided to leave the controversial substance behind and venture into new chemical horizons. Despite the risks and warnings from his closest lieutenants, he boldly plunged into the unknown, thirsty for different experiences. Beyond the facade of power and dominance, the Führer believed that immersing himself in a turbulent world of addiction and despair aided his leadership skills. His days were driven by an explosive combination of cocaine and Eucadol, a potent drug that had become his loyal ally. The power of cocaine and the high amount of Eucadol, as noted by Morell in his records, mingled in his bloodstream and unleashed a frenzy of uncontrollable emotions. Each dose was like a whirlwind, a roller coaster of sensations that dragged him into a state of euphoria and exhilaration. It was a fierce battle between two opposing forces, where the sedation of Eucadol clashed against the vehement energy of cocaine. His body became a battlefield, with his circulatory system struggling under the burden of these powerful substances. Nights turned into a dance with insomnia, while his liver desperately fought against the onslaught of toxins. Amidst this whirlwind of feelings and substances, Hitler became trapped in a dark and chaotic world, where the line between reality and fantasy blurred. It was a constant struggle to maintain control. This dispute brought him to the edge of the abyss and plunged him into the darkest depths of his own mind. In the final moments of the war and of his individual existence, the dictator almost willingly surrendered to the artificial paradises that the drug constructed in his psyche. He believed he could see with absolute clarity while weaving a world tailored to his ecstasy as Führer. For the generals, already disillusioned by the discouraging situation on the front, following his absurd current became an impossible task. The medication provided by Morel kept the supreme leader firmly entrenched in his madness, erecting an insurmountable wall, an invulnerable armor that nothing and no one could penetrate. Any hint of doubt in a war strategy was dispelled by artificially induced confidence. Even as the world crumbled around him and his actions claimed the lives of millions of people, the Führer felt fully justified in his deeds when a substance entered his veins and artificial euphoria seized him.
The substances administered to Adolf Hitler included commercial poisons, as well as psychoactive drugs such as heroin, cocaine, adrenaline via eye drops, and methamphetamine, which since 1938 was marketed on a large scale in Germany as a non-prescription drug under the brand name Pervitin.
The relationship between Hitler and substances is a dark and controversial chapter in history. Although clinical dependency on drugs cannot be proven for the Führer, Morel's cryptic diary from September 1944 suggests frequent use of hard drugs. It is possible that Eucadal entered the dictator's circulatory system in various ways beyond traditional forms of administration. The doctor's notes reveal that he administered a total of 800 injections to the Führer over a period of 1,349 days, which is an alarming measure. In September 1944, the Chancellor received doses of the potent drug up to 4 times in 1 week, with barely a day's break between each dose. This rhythm, more akin to that of an addict, contradicts the version of purely therapeutic application. What did the Supreme Leader feel after each injection of that powerful substance? What actions did the intoxicating sensation that coursed through his body trigger in Hitler, as he savored the initial effects through his palate, like a divine elixir flooding his being? We can only speculate. Perhaps he experienced a sensation comparable to that of a mythical hero after conquering the beast, obtaining the most precious treasures, and reaching the heights of power. Energy surged through him, filling him with vigor and confidence within seconds, like a torrent of ecstasy enveloping him completely. And when, with a smile on his lips, he said to Morel, "I'll be glad to see you in the morning, Doctor." His words resonated with unparalleled authenticity. The dictator knew that a new dose of that magical syringe awaited him at dawn, ready to transport him once again to a state of greatness and power that reality could never match. However, he was not the only Nazi using drugs. Despite being frowned upon for recreational use, narcotics produced by German pharmaceutical companies played a key role for Nazi militias. On the battlefields of the Second World War, German soldiers had an unusual ally. We're talking about Pervitin, a drug created by Third Reich scientists that became a secret weapon to keep troops alert and energetic for long periods of time. But what was this substance really? Let's hear from one of the specialists on the subject, historian Norman Ohler, author of the book Blitzed Drugs in the Third Reich.
So it was very interesting for me to examine how a dictatorship like the Nazi regime was using drugs, was instrumentalizing drugs for its own good, to control people, to boost its army.
Pervitin was an early form of methamphetamine, originally designed as a medication for the treatment of narcolepsy, asthma, and depression. However, the leaders of Nazism saw a much darker potential in this powerful substance and introduced it into the German army during the war. Its use was intended to keep soldiers awake and alert during full days of combat, especially in critical moments such as nighttime offensives or rapid advances. It is even said that the success of the Luftwaffe's lightning attacks, known as Blitzkrieg, was mainly due to the fact that troops were altered with this drug. The effects of Pervitin were immediate and powerful. It increased energy, reduced the need for sleep, and improved concentration and mood. The soldiers who consumed the medication became more aggressive and confident, allowing them to face combat situations with greater determination. However, there were also concerning side effects, such as loss of appetite, dehydration, anxiety, and paranoia. These unintended symptoms were catastrophic for the Nazi armed forces, who had to deal with weakened soldiers who, due to their altered senses, would threaten and even kill comrades or superiors in psychotic episodes. Despite these risks, Pervitin became a widely used tool in the German army, especially in moments of crisis and extreme fatigue. Its impact on the course of the war and on the mental health of soldiers was profound and lasting, leaving a dark legacy in Germany's military history.
Some soldiers turned violent, committing war crimes against civilians. Others even attacked their own officers. By 1941, usage was restricted to a doctor's prescription, and the military tightly controlled its distribution. Soldiers would only receive a couple of tablets at a time, and were discouraged from using them in combat.
In summary, the link between Hitler and drugs, through his personal physician Dr. Morell, is a disturbing section of Third Reich history. The Nazi leader's dependence on a variety of psychoactive substances, such as Eucodal and cocaine, sheds light on his mental state and decisions during the final years of World War II. The widespread use of drugs in Nazi militias, especially Pervitin, is also a disturbing aspect of this period. This secret chapter reminds us of the complexity of the factors influencing historical events, and how individual decisions, as well as institutional policies and practices, can be altered by the use of brain-altering medicines. Furthermore, it serves as a warning about the dangers of drug abuse and the importance of vigilance against their misuse in any context, whether in times of war or in everyday life. It's impossible not to wonder if Hitler would have been equally tyrannical if he hadn't used these drugs. After this video, the answer may be a bit clearer. We're reaching the end of this tragic installment, but before we conclude, we wanted to ask you, do you believe that Hitler's drug abuse affected his judgment during the course of the war? What do you think would have happened if he hadn't been under the influence of narcotics during the most crucial moments of the conflict? We look forward to reading your valuable comments and appreciate your participation. Thank you for staying until the end, and we'll see you in the next episodes of Military History.